Protests continue this weekend from our state capital to the nation's capital as new security fences now surround the U.S. Supreme Court. Senate Democrats have scheduled a vote Wednesday to enshrine federal protections for abortions, which is expected to fail after that bombshell leak of a Supreme Court draft opinion showing justices poised to overturn Roe v. Wade. The headlines nationwide capturing the seismic reaction and implications this past week. U.S. Democratic Senator Tammy Baldwin joins us now from Washington. Senator, good to see you. Welcome back to Up Front.
It's great to be with you.
Let's begin. Democrats right now preparing for a potential vote this coming week on legislation that would codify Roe. You're a co-author of that legislation. Bring me behind the scenes. Where are conversations at right now? And I anticipate you anticipate that this won't pass.
Yeah, so obviously if the court overturns Roe, millions and millions of women will lose the constitutionally protected freedom to make their own personal decisions about healthcare, family, and their bodies. And so this creates a very important opportunity to pass my Women's Health Protection Act. I would support an elimination of the filibuster to get it done if that's what we need to do.
What's happening behind the scenes in terms of this legislation, in terms of the conversations? Is there any scenario where this would pass?
Well, certainly if there was an agreement to eliminate the filibuster, there could be. But I do think that now that this Supreme Court looks poised to overturn Roe versus Wade, that we have a whole different reality facing us when we bring this bill back to the floor.
Senator, we're seeing increased security around the Supreme Court in recent days. What do you make of the protests that we're seeing not only in the nation's capital, but here in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee and Madison and other cities?
So I obviously work in a building across the street from the U.S. Supreme Court when I'm in Washington, D.C. And the assemblies that I've seen have been peaceful. They have been, vocal, but that's what free speech is all about. I am aware that there are folks organizing all around the country. That's what happens at a time when we see, the United States Supreme Court perhaps on the brink of, for the first time in history, eliminating a constitutional right so that women of today will have fewer rights than their mothers or grandmothers did.
Senator, what should happen to the person who leaked this draft?
That'll be for the court to decide. The Chief Justice, John Roberts, has indicated that he will do a thorough investigation and there will be accountability. If
this draft is upheld, would you encourage law enforcement and prosecutors here in the state of Wisconsin to not enforce that 1849 law?
Well, first of all, I would hope that the state legislature would, for once, do the right thing and understand that, understand their responsibility to make sure that a law passed in 1849, which has, that was a different time, a very different time. But I certainly would encourage everyone to be active, to speak out, to write to their members of Congress, their members of the state legislature, and organize and vote.
Senator Tammy Baldwin from our nation's capital. Senator, we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
If Roe is overturned, abortions would be illegal in Wisconsin, leaving the issue to state lawmakers. An 1849 law bans doctors from performing abortions unless the mother's life is at risk. Republican State Representative Barbara Dietrich has authored several bills in recent years that would place more restrictions on abortions. Governor Evers has vetoed these bills. Representative, good to see you. Welcome to Up Front.
Thanks for having me.
Let's begin. If this draft opinion is upheld, are you comfortable with Wisconsin's law as it would be applied?
Well, let me start out, Matt, by saying, first of all, I think one thing we've learned over the years about the abortion issue is that we're catching women in probably one of the most terrified parts of their life, an unexpected pregnancy. So I think compassion is due. I think what will need to come to the table if this opinion comes down in the same manner it was leaked, is that we'll all have to come to the table and figure things out together, both legislatively and working with the executive branch.
I was going to say, broadly speaking, at this point, what do you anticipate state Republicans, or at least Assembly Republicans, will do if Roe is overturned?
I would not even hazard to guess that because, as you may know, I was a co-sponsor of the bill that would allow pharmacists to prescribe birth control to women, to make it even more convenient for women. One thing that I find really disturbing is that with the wide availability of birth control, why are we still experiencing the level of abortion we are when pregnancy, can be prevented? We couldn't even get that through the Senate.
State lawmakers are going to receive an incredible amount of pressure from all sides of this if Roe is overturned. Some Republicans have told me this past week that they're open to conversations about adding exceptions to the current law, whether it be rape or incest. Do you support that?
Well, as you know, the bills I have authored in the past have made exceptions for rape, incest, and the life of the mother. And that is because that's where we can seem to build consensus and get things over the finish line.
Yeah, I was going to say, on the flip side of that, some Republican candidates for governor have said they'd like to see no exceptions, and that would potentially remove the exception for a mother's life at risk. Do you support that, or where does that conversation go at this point?
That's an interesting question, because I think we have to be careful in this regard. Some of these procedures, if you look at one of the procedures that's used for abortion is a DNC. That's also a medical procedure that's not necessarily used to abort a baby. And so we have to be really careful with our language and what we're doing so that we're not criminalizing doctors that are actually performing valid healthcare. So we have to decide what we're going to do with this next. Are we going to allow the law that was established in Wisconsin in 1849 to stand, or are we going to modify that? So those are the discussions that I think will be had.
A debate that's likely to intensify over the coming weeks at the state level. Representative Barbara Dietrich, Representative, thank you.
You are most welcome.
Coming up, the implications ahead of the midterms and what that Ohio Senate primary race this past week means for Wisconsin.